Hello, Psychomotivation. How are you today? I'm doing well. Penelope's kind of worn herself out this morning running around, so I don't know how much she's going to participate. But Hannah's keeping a good eye on us just in case. And I know Annika and Iris are lurking about, among others. Oh, there's Terrence. He's watching. I think Annika's going to warm herself on one of the lights here, so there's that. Anyway, let's talk psychological needs, and of course we got a homework assignment built in this one. So we'll be introducing a portion of that homework assignment as we move through the lecture. So, psychological need, well, it's an inherent source of motivation that generates a desire to interact with the environment as to advance personal growth, social development, and psychological well-being. So it's kind of a multifaceted approach when we talk about psychological needs. Now, let's talk self-determination theory right off the bat. And it's not the first time that we've kind of brought up this term. This is an organismic approach to motivation. There's two assumptions. And these assumptions are more recent. If we go back in the day, we may in fact see where these assumptions were not necessarily held by all psychologists. Assumption number one, people are inherently active. We are busy little beavers, if you will, right? And we exist within a person-environment dialectic. So we have the potential to shape the environment. We also have the potential to choose our environment. But the environment then offers us affordances, maybe offers inhibitory processes. So to understand really, it's this person-environment dialectic, right? It's the interplay, it's the back and forth. It's the relationship between the person, the environment. It's reciprocal. The environment acts on the person acts on the environment, and the person and the environment as a result constantly change, as does the relationship. At least it has the potential to. So person-environment dialectic, let's kind of get a list of examples here. Our psychological needs, that comes from us, that's part of us, right? Our level of intrinsic motivation, and notice that can be environment specific, so that's part of that dialectic. Our developmental tendencies, and that is really how we've become or are becoming who we are. Interests and goals, right, can vary between people. The level of curiosity, and curiosity is a tremendous motivator, if you will. And internalized extrinsic motivation, to the extent that what began as extrinsic motivation later becomes internalized. Now, the environmental events like affordances, and that's another closely associated with the word opportunity, right? External events and how they impact us. Relationships, right? A huge source of environmental effect on us, and also our desire to change the environment can have a lot to do with environments. Community, culture, and culture is often talked about as the hidden hand that shapes us outside our awareness, because culture is all encompassing. Now, if we look at the dialectic of the person, and we start getting a more refined view, a more detailed view, within psychological needs, we're going to really kind of split this lecture into three parts that are explicitly describing these three needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So we're going to go on these three again and again and again, right? Now, intrinsic motivation, we should have a pretty good handle on that from chapter 5, right? Developmental, to the extent of integration versus differentiation. So, and notice both these processes, I integrate aspects of the environment, but I can also differentiate as a result of this. We describe curiosity. Internalized extrinsic motivation, these are values, right? And often as children, we're taught we're either rewarded or punished for adhering to a certain set of values. Our parents' ultimate hope, at least for most of us, is that we internalize these values and then make reward and punishment unnecessary for the maintenance of our values. We talked about identified and internalized regulatory processes, and you should be working on your paper in the near future to explore these ideas. That would be paper 1, right? And then interesting goals, interests, preferences, self-set goals. And notice these are self-set goals because other set goals then really probably belong in the dialectic of the environment. Causality orientation. When we talked in Lecture 5 of PLOC, Perceived Locus of Causality, we weren't just, saying it for the sake of saying it. This becomes amazingly important. To what extent do I believe that I'm the causer of my actions and ultimately responsible for my environment? Or to what extent do I believe that I'm a non-causal being and the environment just shoves me around, right? And then personal strivings. That is, what is it that we want to get done? Now, the dialectic of the environment, hey, affordances. Do we have available to us interesting activities? Do we have optimal challenges? Do we have opportunities for action? Do we have enriched learning activities? And notice that affordances can come to us from our workplace, and we can be very much stymied in our workplace. Do this, shut up, do it. I don't want to hear from you, right? And just do it and do it over again. There's little in the way of affordances in that kind of environment. Or Tom Peters, the business guru, the famous question that opens the door to affordances. The four most important words, according to Peters, that a manager can ask is, what do you think? It's that simple. That is opening the door to potentially understanding affordances. External events, rewards and incentives, are external events that are applied as consequences to our behavior. Right? Feedback, praise, again, same similar vein. Choices. Choices operate, we'll talk about it. Choices are problematic because we say, I'd love to have a choice, but choices can also be overwhelming. Impose goals. And now these are goals, not self-set goals like we talked on the previous slide, but goals that are imposed upon us from outside. And competitions may, in fact, be in this category. Now, if we look at the relationship aspect of the dialectic of the environment, to what extent do we get support for autonomy, competence, and relatedness? And this is something to consider because what's important to you, that's fine. But remember, if we're looking at someone else, let's look at your partner. You are then a tremendous aspect of their environment within this category of relationships. So let me put it to you this way, rather than us viewing the perspective selfishly, what does this environment do for me? We can also ask the question, when I am the environment that is for my partner, what do I do for them? Do I support their need for autonomy? Do I support their need for competence? Do I support their need for relatedness? And I think quite often it's probably better that we take that angle than the simple selfish perspective angle. And then community culture. Prescription and proscription. Fancy words, prescription, do this. Proscription, don't do that, right? It is basically kind of that simple. Values, priorities, preferences. And note that those are often dictated to us by our community or our culture. If you live in the Hollywood culture, right, all the way back to Wallace Simpson, right? She was quoted as saying you can never be too rich or too thin. And that might be a mantra in Hollywood. So that is then something that affects one's behavior to the extent one allows themselves to be affected by that culture for ever-increasing thinness and ever-increasing wealth. What are the expectations and roles, right? And this is part of the community. We've seen a tremendous amount of research on how expectations or roles affect our behavior. And maybe one of the most controversial and perhaps flawed studies that looked at the expectations generated by roles. What do you think? Might be Phil Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. Although it's not an experiment, it was an observation, if you will. And then aspirations to well-being and how important that is. And Ohio State at least talks like that's important. They've, given us the 9 wellness dimensions. And in fact, those are built into Psychology of Adjustment, the course I'm teaching. They said, if you want to continue to teach Psychology of Adjustment, our suggestion is that you put at the core the 9 wellness dimensions as offered by Ohio State. That is our Ohio State community. So, let's begin with homework 3A, and this is for all team members, right? And you can find this, in the module section, or you can search by assignments. You can find it in that way as well. This is for all team members. Of the 3, autonomy, related, and competence, what is your strongest perceived need of the 3? What is an environment that facilitates the fulfillment of that need? What is an environment that inhibits the fulfillment of that need? And these 2 questions, you see where I'm going with this? I hope you do. First of all, let's get in touch with our needs, because I want a large part of this course to be the story of you. So of the needs that are there, that are present, autonomy, related, and competence, as the most basic kind of global needs, what environments facilitate, let's say, autonomy? What environments might then inhibit my achieving a sense of autonomy, right? So what I want us to get clear is, first of all, what are our needs? And then what are the environments that allow us to enhance our experience of that need, or environments that present obstacles to the enhancement of that need, right? So for one of your teammates, suggest an alternative environment that might facilitate that need to your teammate. Make sure all teammates get a suggestion, 1 suggestion per teammate then. So let's make sure that everyone's heard. And then the template, your assignment template, which I hope is working out for you. And as we've started grading now, I've started grading, and now this week the course assistants are starting grading. We're going to pay real attention to how effective those templates are. So if you see any problems, you just talk to me, and we'll move through it, because this is all new ground for the course assistants and I for pretty much to be this detailed in the way we want assignments presented and turned in. So in this, name, need, right? Okay. Got those? Pretty much fill those in. Environment that fulfills that need, you're going to fill that in. Environment that inhibits that need, that interferes with it. And then one of your teammates is going to suggest an alternative environment, because, let's be teamy about it. And I want to see the suggestor's name there as well. So everyone is expected to contribute. Everyone is expected to contribute equally. If you think you're going to slack, I don't know why you would want to do that in the first place. Because this is a story of you, and if you're going to slack on the story of you, what can we say, right? So let's get on the dime, let's get our work done, and let's be good team members who contribute to our teams promptly, effectively, and with necessary effort. So let's talk self-determination theory. Self-determination theory posits the 3 needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So I think, implied by the order here, we should, or we can go alphabetical order, which is the same as the way it's set up, right? We can do autonomy. What does this mean? It's the psychological need to experience self-direction and personal endorsement in the initiation, the regulation of one's behavior. Okay. So I'm high in a need for autonomy. And my niche at Ohio State allows me, right? It's an environment that allows me to demonstrate to myself my level of autonomy. What is my relationship to Ohio State, or more specifically the psychology department in this regard? They say, Mark, would you like to teach psychology of motivation? And I say, yes, I would like to teach psychology of motivation. Motivation was one of my research areas. I'm amazingly curious about motivation. Discussing motivation excites me, and thinking about motivation, I think I would be a good fit for this. And they say, okay, so you go teach that course. That's the end of the conversation. From there on out, I'm basically on my own. How am I going to design the course? What book am I going to use? Am I going to use a book? What is the presentation format, right? Note that the only thing that's really changed here is we've gone from in-person to online. So that was not a choice I made, right? This course had to go online because the course has an enrollment cap of 150 or 160. There's like 1 or 2 rooms in the university, considering social distancing, that we could be in person in. So we're not. So, but everything is up to me, right? So when the course is finished, when it's all said and done, when it's designed, when it's delivered, when it's evaluated, this has been my work. Now, That's not to say you guys don't instruct what I do to a great extent, because you guys talk to me every semester, and then I go back and I use those ideas to refine what it is. But ultimately, it's my choice. I get a strong sense of autonomy, and that's a very powerful need for me. This indicates a good fit. Now, some people don't necessarily appreciate autonomy to the same degree, and if they're simply told, hey, teach this course, they're going to go, but what do I do? What should I include? What format should I use? Right? And those people might want more direction. Right? So we differ on these needs, and that's important to recognize. It's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of diversity. And note, some of the most interesting types of diversity are the types of diversity that are hidden. I mean, we like to talk gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and that's cool. But what about those types of diversity, like one's need level for autonomy? That, to me, is a fascinating type of diversity. So behavior is autonomous, self-determined, right? When our interests, preferences, wants guide our decision-making process to engage or not engage in a particular activity. Right? So I have a schedule. Fridays and Mondays, I'm likely to do my taping. Why? Because Wednesday, I'm likely to sit down and bang out the assignments, refine the assignments, incorporate the assignments into PowerPoint. So then, you know, I got classes Tuesday and Thursday, so that chews up a lot of the day. But then come Friday, I choose to do my taping on Friday. And if things don't work out well, I might then be able to actually do some more taping on Saturday and or Monday, right? But this is a schedule of my own design, and I'm okay with that. But I'm pretty high in self-regulation. It's not difficult for me to make myself do that. And note, for other people, it might be hard for them to force themselves to maintain that schedule. Notice, I'm not forcing myself to maintain that schedule. Just do it. Because somehow I believe that's what works best, or it's the right thing to do. So again, it's another way that I can demonstrate my autonomy and reap the psychological benefits for doing it. So 3 subjective qualities within the experience of autonomy is internal perceived locus of control. I'm calling my own shots. Who's in charge of this course? Mark is. Who decides when Mark does his work in the various components of the course? Mark does, right? So it's a high internal locus of control or locus of causality. We can kind of use those synonymously, right? The individual's understanding of the causal source of her motivated actions. Ultimately, you know, I got the boundaries. The course starts here, the course ends here. The rest, figure that shit out. Okay? Now, volition. It's the unpressured willingness to engage in an activity. And I said, well, today's taping day, so what am I going to do? I'm going to sit in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and then I'm going to attend to the email, and then I'll see what else I need to do. And by 10 o'clock, I should have the camera set up, I should have the screen set up, I should be ready to go by 10, and I'll probably tape until about 3, right? So it's the unpressured willingness to engage in this activity. And then the perceived choice. Sense of choice we experience in the environment that provides us the decision-making flexibility. So I can really call my own shots on this. And I know that my deadlines are dictated by the assignments, the assignment deadlines. So I got to stay ahead of the assignment deadlines to give you guys enough time to do the work. So really what dictates is the assignment deadline, which I created, right? But also what dictates my efforts as much as anything is my need to make sure that I give you enough time to do this in a less pressured or stressed way, right? So think about it. A lot of times what this involves is a certain amount of kindness in the way or empathy, and putting myself in your shoes. What do I need to do to make your life less hell? I'm not saying I don't make your life hell. Many of you probably perceive that I do make your life hell. But I'm trying to make it less hell, if that's any help, if that makes you feel better, right? Let's discuss free will for a moment. And usually this is a class discussion. Does it exist? And then we can always ask the question, does it matter? Does it really change anything? But if so, if free will does exist, then what does it look like, right? And then, if we want to be empirical about it, right? If we want to, kind of bump up our game and not just stop at opinion, but use opinion as a starting point to gather information to support or refute that opinion, we ask the question, what is our evidence? And we're talking about being critical thinkers here, right? Or is free will just an illusion that makes me feel better about my life because I think I have free will when I actually don't? And then again, I get back to that question, does it matter? Right? And I know I'm being glib about this. It's a tough question. I like what, well, what if it only is an illusion? All right. Roy Baumeister has written a recent article on free will, not too recent anymore. And what he said is basically what free will, if you want the best evidence, according to Baumeister, for free will, is you have an ability to inhibit actions. Now, Penelope, no offense to Penelope, but if I drag the wand toy, the wand with the string on it, and I drag this in front of the cats, right? Some of my cats can't resist chasing after it. They can't resist. They don't necessarily have the free will in that regard that they have to pounce on it. They can't inhibit that pounce behavior. Whereas we could say, I'm not gonna pounce on that. I choose not to pounce on that. So Baumeister sets it up that your best evidence of free will is when you decide not to do something. Interestingly, you may or may not agree with Baumeister. I like his perspective. I don't know. I don't like to necessarily get bogged down in this question. I guess I've spent too many evenings over a few beers or a few glasses of wine discussing this with my colleagues, and we get nowhere discussing it other than having something to talk about. So, are we just being tricked? And this is another point of view here. And what might E.O. Wilson say? And E.O. Wilson is the father of sociobiology, so there's his portrait there. And basically, what if DNA just created DNA? I mean, what if DNA just created us to make new DNA? Well, as in the book Sociobiology, which is a massive tome, and it's the foundation of courses that Wilson taught in this sociobiology, he offers that a chicken is simply a device that makes eggs, and eggs make chickens to make eggs. So what if everything that occurs is really occurring because it's DNA's imperative to replicate itself, to create additional varieties or variations in DNA? See, the thing is, we as an individual, boom, we're conceived, and then eventually we croak. The one thing that is the constant in this whole affair we call life, the one thing that's the constant is the DNA. Species evolve, they disappear, right? But through this whole process, over literally hundreds of millions of years, longer than that, it's the DNA that has remained. Species come and go, but DNA is here, and it appears to be here for the long haul, right? So is it DNA that's running the show and just using us, and part of the way DNA gets this done is it just tricks us into thinking that we're in the driver's seat, when all along we're just being used by DNA. Now, this is an extreme position, right? So we look at Baumeister's take on free will. Sure, you can inhibit behaviors. E.O. Wilson is going to say, I don't know that you have free will. How do we know that it's just not DNA tricking you into having free will? And notice that we can find evidence to support either position. So, the essence of humanity's spiritual dilemma is that we evolved genetically to accept one truth and discovered another. Is there a way to erase the dilemma? To resolve the contradictions between the transcendentalist and the empiricist worldviews? And this question I find more intriguing. Now I'll use empiricism versus metaphysical, right? But the older I get, the more room I see for metaphysics or the transcendentalist. And they might take away my empiricist card for saying that, but because I went to kind of the most empirically driven psychology program on the planet is OSU social psychology. If you can't provide evidence, then shut the hell up is basically the mantra, right? If you don't achieve significance, you got nothing to say, buddy. I know that's kind of tongue-in-cheek. So homework 3, part B, what do you think? And let's just take a brief little poll. You'll have a table. You fill in the table. You put your name in the first column. Believe it or not, the column that says name. Put your name in there, and then check the column. Check the cell that most corresponds. Do you believe that there's free will? Not at all. To some extent, to a large extent, or totally. Yeah. And that's all you got to do for part B. So, just kind of getting us through, connecting us to the lecture, and letting us communicate with each other within our teams. Now, comes with free will. Free will, then, is associated with the notion of choice. And if we view choice as a conundrum, right, the conundrum of choice, not all choices promote autonomy, right? Either or choices don't necessarily present us with autonomy because the choice is already presented to us. We get this choice or we get that choice. That's not necessarily autonomy supporting, right? True choice over people's actions is meaningful choice that reflects people's values and interests. So often when we're offered, do you want this? Do you want that? Right? Well, I might want something else. And remember, anytime that you're sent into a situation of forced choice, right, what do we know? Well, we know that, in fact, either or are inherently deceptive because we're saying this or that, right? But what are the other options? We're often presented with either or, but there's almost always 2 more options that are not explicitly stated in that choice, in perhaps that attempted manipulation. And notice, if autonomy is so important to me, then what really becomes important to support my autonomy is the ability to detect when I'm being put into a manipulative environment. And this is that person-environment dialectic. Autonomy is important to me. That's part of my person dialectic. But someone wants me to do this or that. That's the environmental dialectic that's being imposed on me. So either or choices are inherently deceptive. What are the other options? Well, neither. No, I don't want either. Or perhaps I want both. But notice when I use that term or, I'm implying one or the other. Both is not a possibility, and I must choose A or B. That no A, no B is not on the table for someone offering me this choice. So choice also, interestingly, uses cognitive resources. It uses our energy, our life force, if you will. Now, Baumeister, who I talked about earlier in Free Will, calls this phenomenon ego depletion. And this is his term. I'm not crazy about the term because when I think ego, I start thinking in terms of Freudian psychology, and that's not how he's using it. Ego depletion is your life force. And what Baumeister is offering is that when you're offered a choice, it takes a certain amount of effort to think yourself through the choice. And more difficult choices take greater effort. Have you ever been exhausted by a complex choice? When you think back, maybe you got a couple college acceptances and you said, which school should I go to? Right? For me, it was problematic when I went to graduate school. When I went to undergrad, it was pretty simple. That is, I completed my AA. I was completing my AA. I was ready to go to college, and I'm in Southern California. I'm going to go to University of California because the price is right, and they're frickin' awesome schools. And so I said, I sent in my application, and I said, I'm applying to UCLA, UC Irvine, and UC San Diego. And they came back and said, we've accepted you to UC Irvine. Why? Well, I live closest to Irvine, so it's like kind of a slam dunk. They put me in the school I was closest to, right? Well, That wasn't much of a choice. But when it came time to apply for graduate school, I racked my brain looking at all the potential graduate school programs, and then the acceptances fortunately started rolling in, and I was accepted to 7 or 8 different schools. But it's like, what the hell choice am I going to make? And that was a tough one because none of the schools were in California, so it required my wife and I moving to the school. So I traveled to each and every school. I met with people, and then I'm still like, God, now I'm making a choice of schools, but it's going to affect my wife for at least the next 6 or 7 years. So I said, we need to do a road trip. So we packed up and we flew to the closest school, which is in the Midwest from Los Angeles. We rented a car, and then we started driving to these schools so that she could have a voice in the choice as well. This is freaking exhausting, right? So some choices use resources, that is our cognitive resources. Choices also create anxiety and tension because what if I choose wrong? What if I don't have enough information to really feel secure in my choice, right? And we often want to reduce the sense of tension and anxiety, and Festinger, of course, would have then discussed or described cognitive dissonance theory. And that is that when we have, do I buy the Camaro or do I buy the Firebird? Right? But it's even worse. Once I make the choice, it's like, oh my God, did I choose correctly? Was the Firebird actually the better car, or should I have stuck with the Camaro? Right? I don't know. So we go through a lot of cognitive gymnastics to release the tension, the anxiety that are the result of choice. Okay? And notice, Festinger is talking a highly motivational process when he talks the reduction of cognitive dissonance. I make a choice. I don't know if it was the correct choice or not. I feel the tension. Now I'm motivated to reduce that tension. It's an actual sensation really in our stomach, almost a sickness in our stomach. Some people might call this guilt if I choose to do something, let's say, that's against my values. Tremendous example of motivation, right? Now, I've just finished reading a book called Escape from Freedom. I'm a big fan of this book. It's by Erich Fromm. It was written in 1941 as Germany was descending into Nazism. And this has been a slow process since 1932, and people are watching it, especially psychologists, and saying, how is this occurring? And the basic premise is that life is overwhelming. Life is uncertain. A lot of people don't like uncertainty or can't live with the anxiety. So they look for some strong, confident leader that says, hey, don't worry your pretty little head about it. I'm going to tell you what the world's about. I'm going to tell you the direction we should go, and I'm going to tell you how we're going to get there, what role you're going to play in it. And then we see large segments of the population who are wigged out by this anxiety from too many choices, just slavishly follow a leader so that they escape the freedom of choices. But notice choices could be reconstrued for some people as a tyranny. Can't someone just tell me what to do? Huh? So it's a fascinating concept, and I think what's frightening is we're in the midst of this right now. Now, we may have dodged a bullet, we may have not, but there's a huge segment in the United States, maybe 20, 30% of the population, who has become so anxious and become so worn down by what the future might represent that they're willing to throw in with any person who presents themselves as a confident leader. I'll tell you what to do. You don't have to worry about it. And they're like, tell me, because I will feel my anxiety be reduced, because I no longer have to worry about uncertainty. You're spelling it out for me. Right? So, what do you think? Confused? Lost? Unclear? Perplexed? Disoriented? Bewildered? Well, let me tell you how it really is. You don't have to worry. You don't have to be anxious. I know the score, and I'm going to lead us down the correct path. There you go. That's how authoritarian leaders essentially present themselves. And authoritarians appeal to people who experience this high level of uncertainty. So, note this is an individual difference, one's motivation to escape uncertainty. All right, so supporting autonomy, what can we do? Well, as a society, as a culture, that is the environmental part of the dialectic, we can create in people the ability to think critically. We can create in people the ability to accept their anxiety, to understand their anxiety is a normal process that is the result of having choices. And it's actually a good thing, because the anxiety means you need to think this shit through. Now, some people just don't want to think. The anxiety occurs and they say, oh, thinking makes my head hurt. Just tell me what to do, right? Well, we're talking about from a very early age, from our parents, from grade school, from kindergarten, learning that thinking is okay. And that critical thinking is even better than thinking. And if we're willing to tolerate some anxiety, to take some time and generate thoughts of our own, then we don't need to depend on other people putting thoughts in our head. At least for those of us who value autonomy. So autonomy support is the interpersonal sentiment behavior to identify, nurture, develop in others' inner motivational resources. And hopefully every year that I teach this course, it is a little more autonomy supportive. It becomes a little less of telling you the answer, but creating an environment where you can generate the answers for yourself as they suit you, right? So control is an interpersonal sentiment, behavior, pressure another towards compliance with a prescribed way of thinking, feeling, or behaving. And we note that Janus discovered the phenomenon of groupthink, where we have a highly dictatorial leader who's telling people in the group what to think. And anyone who questions or deviates is suddenly smacked down by the mind guards and told, no, you're thinking, and then they're punished. They're given consequences that make them shut up. Right, and then people become unanimous as a result of this. So to the extent, do we create an autonomy supportive or controlling motivating style, right? This is a choice that we make. This is when we become the environment for someone else. Am I attempting to inspire someone else's autonomy, or am I attempting to control them and rob them of their autonomy, right? So enabling conditions then takes the other person's perspective, and that requires empathy, the all-important construct of empathy, and it values personal growth opportunities. So part of what I'm doing in a lot of these assignments is saying, hey, what are you about? Who are you? And if you don't really know, that's okay, because I'm going to try and ask you the questions that help you illuminate for yourself who you are. And then once we discover who you are, what kind of environments do you think you could select that augment, enhance, and allow you to become who you are or who you want to be? Note, your required textbook. Who am I? 16 basic desires. I want you to get in touch with you so you become more effective at choosing a life that will support your autonomy, related, and competence as those are important to you. So, the control then, the control people pressure the other towards a prescribed outcome. They target a prescribed outcome. So they say, no, this is the way to think. This is what to believe. Do this, and it'll be frickin' awesome. Trust me. And when people start saying, trust me, you have to say, I hope you say, why are you asking me to trust you? Do you think you could just provide me with some evidence so we don't have to do this trust thing? You could just provide me evidence and I say, oh, okay, I see. But when someone's saying trust me, it usually implies I have no evidence. Just trust me on this. Just do what I say. Okay? And notice then that really requires that you identify with me in that regard, and that we'll talk about different types of compliance later in the course. So supporting autonomy, instructional behaviors, nurtures inner motivational resources, if we're talking autonomy support, relies on informational language rather than command language, promotes valuing the material, acknowledges and accepts negative affect. We've already done that throughout this lecture. So I hope that you see that the lecture is operating on two levels. There's the explicit statements, but there's also the behavioral subtext. The more effective I become in this role, then the more those two align and support each other through this educational process. Okay? Believe it or not, we instructors don't just come up and start blabbing. We think an awful lot about what it is we're trying to do and what is the most effective manner in doing it. So, control, they rely on outer sources of motivation. They rely on pressuring language, right? They neglect explanatory rationales. They assert power to silence negative affect and to resolve conflict. So they punish those who might speak out. Okay. What we're going to do now, and I've been just trying to decide how to do this, is video time. At this point, what's available is a video, and I'm not going to show it here. What I've done is I'm going to post a link, right, with the lecture. So at this time, if you want to pause the lecture and watch the video, that would be really cool. A little bit about and I think it's already posted on Carmen, if I'm not mistaken. If not, it will be by tomorrow. The video is a video I used when we were trying to transform our organization at Boise Cascade. We were trying to increase the level of autonomy and autonomy seeking in the worker, and to enhance their satisfaction, but also to enhance our business. The two go hand in hand. The video you're going to see is the Leadership Alliance by Tom Peters, who's a famous business guru I've mentioned previously, and there's 4 segments in this video. I've cut one of the 4 out, and that's the video that I'm offering you if you'd like to watch it. And what it is about transforming the organization in the 1980s at Harley-Davidson. And it's a fascinating video because it really centers on the idea of autonomy. And that is, how do we create autonomous behavior in our workers? What is wrong with us in that we've been squelching people's autonomy, and because of that, the quality of our motorcycle and the quality of the life of people making that motorcycle have continually deteriorated to the point where we're looking like we might go out of business. And if you consider that Harley-Davidson was on the brink of going out of business, they asked for federal protection to prevent bankruptcy. And now you look at Harley-Davidson, it's like freaking impossible to buy a Harley-Davidson, and they're some of the most expensive motorcycles, and people are lined up to buy them. They're some of the highest quality bikes made on the planet now. What happened and how did it change? And that's what the video is about. It's an inspirational video, and I hope you enjoy it. Tom Peters does a great job. He does a great job of interviewing, and he crafts a very coherent message that's very entertaining. So it's about 14-15 minutes of your life. I think you'll enjoy it, because what it does is not only tell you the story of Harley-Davidson, but it says, you know, me as a manager, me as a supervisor, which most of you will be managers or supervisors, you're at OSU. This is the place that generates leaders. What will you have in your toolkit to help you create a better life and a better product and a better contribution to your community through your work? Right? So check it out. I think you'll find it fascinating. I certainly do. And if you take Org Psych, I'll show you a different segment. All right, so then you'll get to see one about General Motors. So depending on which class, which segment might come apparent to you. And as an aside, I bought that as a videotape when I was doing trainings, organizational transformation trainings at Boise Cascade. And believe it or not, it's not a cheap video. That videotape cost me it cost Boise $750. Right, so yeah, industrial videos like that can be quite expensive. Anyway, 4 essential ways of supporting autonomy. Nurture inner motivational resources. Right? So, encourage initiative by others by identifying their interests, their preferences, their competencies. Okay, I'm trying to do that throughout this course, and we'll have the basic needs. Let's put ourselves in touch with ourselves. Find ways to allow others to behave in ways that express those interests, preferences, and competencies. Man, you can be a people developer, so you can do this with your children. You can do this with your partner. You can do this with your employees, right? You can do this with yourself. That is, find ways that allow this to happen. Now, controlling motivators, they forego inner motivational resources. They rely on extrinsic motivators. And interestingly, I had a student write me who's involved in a sorority, and she says, I can't take the quiz and schedule on Sunday because we have recruiting, and if I don't attend the recruiting all the way through, I will be fined. And that really took me aback. Because when you're starting to think in terms of People will not want to comply, and if they don't want to comply, then I have to deliver some type of punishment on them. Then what are we asking them to do in the first place? That we feel that it's necessary to punish them if they don't. If we're resorting to punishment, ultimately we can step back quite a ways and say, what are we doing wrong in the first place? That is, if you need to punish, then you obviously did not create an autonomy supporting environment. Okay? So consider that. Now, 2, relies on informational language. And this is going to be big on paper 1. That is, we use the term explanatory rationale. So if you're trying to get someone to do an uninteresting task, how do you motivate them to do it? Well, you provide an explanatory rationale, which could include then this informational language. So, treat listlessness, poor performance, inappropriate behavior as motivational problems to be solved. That is really a lot of what paper 1 is about. Address the motivational problem with flexible informational language. So diagnose the cause of the motivational problems, and then communicate feedback, right, in a way that supports improvement and progress in the level of motivation in that regard. Or you can just use a pressuring, rigid, and no-nonsense communication style, get it done, right? And when I was working at the paper mill, when I was in the union, it explained to me when I first signed on to all of us in the union, if someone from the company, if you're saying, no, I don't want to do that, or I don't think it's right to do that, and someone from the company finally uses a specific language, work as directed, then you must work as directed. You can file a grievance later on, but as soon as someone from management tells you work as directed, you better just work as directed and let's settle it later. Right, Penelope? Should we try that? Sleep as directed, Penelope. What does she do? She licks herself. She's not very obedient, right? So, promotes valuing. So, autonomy supportive motivators, what do they do again? And you notice we're focusing on the blue boxes here. Communicate the value, worth, meaning, utility, importance of engaging in uninteresting tasks. Again, tied to the process of developing an explanatory rationale. Using a because phrase to explain why uninteresting activity is worth the other's time and effort. And it's kind of like, well, agreed. It certainly isn't pleasant to have to pick up trash all day long. But consider how our customers respond to the environment we create if it's covered in trash. It really becomes unpleasant for our customers and they don't want to do business with us anymore. So ultimately, while it's not interesting to pick up trash, it supports our overall goals of having a successful customer experience and staying in business. Right? So we begin, notice I'm using information. I'm not saying you must do this. What I'm doing is the benefits to doing this are, I'm using information. Right? Do not take the time, controlling motivators, to explain the importance of engaging in these. Just do it. Get it done. I told you to do it. I expect it to be done. I'm your boss. That should be enough. Or notice sometimes parents resort to this type of language. And often it's not because they're evil, horrible human beings. It's because they're exhausted, right? But because I said so, because I'm the daddy, or whatever. It's largely not a selling point. Okay? Yeah. Acknowledges and accepts negative affect, right? Listen carefully to the expressions of negative affect and resistance and accept them as a valid reaction. They are valid reactions. Say, wow, you are not happy about this policy, are you? Or you're not happy about having to do this. Be right out there. And then you do the paraphrasing thing. You say, let me see if I've got this straight. You're expressing your distaste for this task because, right? And the beauty of this is once you repeat back to someone what they told you in your own words, they say, wow, someone is listening to me and someone understands me. That doesn't mean you can do anything about it. But right off the bat, you're creating this bridge because, yes, I do understand what you're saying. Now, don't necessarily agree. That's not where we're going with that, but I understand, right? So we're collaboratively with the other person to solve the underlying cause of the negative affect and resistance. And this is where we invoke Tom Peters. What do you think? What do you think we can do to make this task less unpleasant? What can we do to alleviate some of your anxiety? What can we do to to diminish your resistance to doing this task. So we start to incorporate the person into the problem-solving activity, hence boosting their experience level of autonomy. So ignore the other expressions of negative affect. I don't want to hear it. You're always belly aching. I don't want to hear it. Just shut the hell up, right? Try to change the negative affect into something more acceptable. Oh, you don't really mean that, do you? You can't be that angry about it. And now you're not letting the people own their feelings, right? So you're denying their feelings. You're minimizing their feelings. So again, take it in. Paraphrase it back to them. And then try and find some way, some mutually agreeable path to move forward, thus enhancing the person's experience of autonomy and demonstrating your level of empathy and frickin' human kindness. Okay? So moment-to-moment autonomy support, what autonomy supportive people do and say? They listen carefully. They allow others to talk. They don't cut them off. Oh, I know what you're thinking. No, don't tell someone what they're thinking. Just listen, right? Provide the rationale. I know it sucks, and this is one of the reasons that we do it, right? Encourage the effort. I really would appreciate your participation in this, right? Praise progress, mastery. Ask others what they want to do. What do you think, right? Respond to questions. Acknowledge the other person's perspective. I see where you're coming from. Right? What controlling people do? They hold hog learning materials, so they don't share, right? They show the correct answers, they tell correct answers, they speak directives. That is as if there's a correct answer. And you notice in a lot of your assignments, there isn't necessarily a correct answer. What we're learning to do as instructors here, to a greater and greater extent, is to assess thought process, that is, and effort, more so than simply look at answers. Okay. Should, must have two statements. Got to do this. Must, should. Ask controlling questions and seem demanding. So, what kind of boss do you want to be? What kind of manager do you want to be? It's largely up to you. These are choices you can make. Support your own autonomy, right? Benefits from autonomy support, what are we talking about? Motivation, well, we see greater levels of autonomy, competence, relatedness. We see higher levels of intrinsic motivation. We see mastery motivation. People want to become better. We see people demonstrate curiosity about the tasks and explore. We see enhanced creativity as a result of all of these, right? As far as engagement, we see more engagement. We see higher levels of positive emotion, less negative emotion. I would restructure that. I'm not a big fan of positive and negative emotion. I would say we see more approach type emotions and less avoidance type emotions, but you get the idea. Class attendance. So we may see increased class attendance. We may see people persist at difficult tasks for a longer period of time. We see more people stay in school if we're using the academic model versus dropping out. And then development. People, then their self-worth is enhanced, right, through both self-esteem and self-efficacy. We see greater risk-taking, which is often associated with creativity, and we see preference for optimal challenges. Where do we go from here? Well, we see with learning, conceptual understanding, not just memorization of facts to regurgitate on a test, right? We see deeper processing rather than a shallow relationship to the material. We also see then perhaps the application of the learning to real-world situations, active information processing, and more refined and improved self-regulation strategies. Performance? Well, that might bear out in grades depending on what we're grading. We might see higher quality task performance, and we might see a difference in standardized test scores, but not really looking for that necessarily. But here's the real winner, right? Psychological well-being, greater psychological well-being, greater vitality, and greater school life work satisfaction depending on the context in which we're discussing this. So, that being said, why not look at a couple illustrations of autonomy? So if we see here in this systems model, the boxes here, we see teachers' autonomy support, parental autonomy support, and administrators autonomy support. What do these lead into? Well, we can see they all serve to enhance students' perceived sense of autonomy, right? And then from the parental autonomy support and the teacher autonomy support, we see students perceive competence, right? Awesome. That is, most people like a sense of feeling competent. And then if we combine the perceived autonomy and perceived competence, the student's self-determined academic motivation should, all else being equal, increase. And we should see then diminishing student dropout behavior. So it's a pretty simple model, right, that just seeks to combine these elements to show you one possible outcome. And if we're trying to look at why students are motivated to drop out rather than motivated to stay in, right, we have at least one explanation here. Now, in study 2, we see this relationship, that is children's motivational benefits from autonomy support rather than controlling rules. And now you can just look through this table at your own, but what we see then is, well, let's take one for example, right? The autonomy supportive way and its effect on creativity, we see the measure comes out at 5.34 but 4.8 for the controlling way. So as we communicate these rules, we see an overall demonstrated benefit, right, of using the autonomy supportive way. And all those elements, of course, we've described previously in the lecture now. Might be enough on autonomy. And again, remember the homework assignment is going to look at you. To what extent do you believe autonomy, is autonomy an important value to you, and what environments then allow you to feel autonomous? Okay. When I worked at the lumber mill, let's just say it wasn't an autonomy supportive environment. My boss was a very controlling, rigid human being. Right? It's like my way or the highway. He didn't ask what we thought ever. He just told us what to do. And if we weren't doing it up to his standards, he would just come and yell at us. So he robbed us of the sense of autonomy, and ultimately it did not help his business when you get down to it, right? So, enough autonomy. Let us talk competence for a little while. This is a psychological need to be effective in interactions with the environment. This is a sense of doing well, if you will. So, key environmental conditions, optimal challenge and flow. Okay, now we're going to pick up on some of those mid-range theories, the mini-theories that we discussed at the beginning of the course. Csikszentmihalyi talks about the concept of flow. It's a state of concentration that involves holistic absorption in an activity. That is, and flow, one of the easiest ways to sense flow is you're engaged in activity and suddenly you're made aware of the time and you go, oh my God, where's the time gone? The time has flown by as if it were nothing. I've been doing this for an hour and it seems like a minute. That's usually a pretty good indicator we were in a state of flow. One of the things I miss dearly is our time in the classroom together, and I know I've said this more than once. When things are aligned, when a lecturer is really rocking it and the class is participating and asking these freaking awesome questions, and then I get to take questions that were asked early in the lecture and continue to mold the lecture to answer those questions throughout. It's this really one-up dynamic process that will never be recreated, and time just goes away. And it's under these circumstances when we're doing the lecture together, right, having class, and then all of a sudden I look up at the clock and I go, son of a bitch, I think we're out of time. And students haven't been watching the clock. They're like, whoa, okay, right? That's entering a state of flow. And the place that I most reliably enter the state of flow, I think the number one spot is in the classroom. In all the things I can think about that I've done in my life. Another place where I tend to enter a state of flow relatively reliably, and notice, then these become important environments. The classroom's an important environment. Believe it or not, is my garden, and especially in the spring. Because it's like, okay, so I got all my raised beds out there, I'm going to grow my vegetables, I'm going to grow my flowers, and now I have to do what? Well, I have to turn over dirt. So I have to get out the fork, the shovel, right? And then I got to mix in the compost. And I got to repair any of the raised beds that are rotting out or falling apart. And all of a sudden I'll look up and I'll be my God, I've been out here for like 9 hours. I haven't even eaten because I'm just so absorbed by what I'm doing. So, optimal challenge and flow. More challenge in the classroom than in the garden necessarily, but now interdependency between, let's go to number 2, between challenge and feedback. Setting the stage for challenge, but then deriving appropriate feedback so one can actually measure how they are not conforming but adapting to the challenge, right? 3, structure. Information about the pathways to desired outcomes, supports guidance for the pursuit of these pathways. So often for employees, they don't necessarily know much about the end point. Maybe it's something they've never done before. So as a manager or supervisor, what I want to do is establish pathways to the goal that assist people in achievement of the goal. And then failure tolerance, right? Considerable error making is essential for optimized learning. Right? So failure produces opportunities for learning. And, you know, we already in a different class had just a minor grading snafu, if you will. New assignment for the course assistant, don't really know what's going on, not necessarily clear on the expectations, right? And maybe the grades were a tad harsh. And once she posted the grade, she emailed me and said, what do you think? I'm not sure I did this right. And I'm like, well, let me take a look at it, you know. And I had a little student feedback. And between all that, we said, I think that we got to back off. I think those grades were maybe a tad harsh. So we got to just go with this. We're all doing new things. We got brand new assignments. We're invoking the use of templates to a greater extent. How does this affect grading, right? And it's like, hey, we'll get it. We got it. If some students were given a 4 instead of a 5 on that assignment, we can rectify that. We can go back in and give them 5s, right? So, but it's tolerance. This is not the end of the world. This is not a reason to yell at somebody. This is a reason to take a look at what we're doing, reassess, and move forward, right? Failure produces opportunities for learning. And remember, if you consider yourself a creative person, you're going to fail more than you're going to succeed, because creativity requires repeated failures, right? If you're doing something brand new that's never been done before, often it's not going to work. And you're going to have to learn every time you do it, wow, that didn't quite hit it, but I wonder if I do this instead, then maybe I'll get a little closer. So, failure is not a bad thing. Failure is an opportunity to learn. So, let us then think about entering the state of flow. And what we have here then is the extent of the task challenge. And is this a really hard task, or this is a really easy task? Where is it, or somewhere in between? And then the extent of the personal skill. So to the extent that I have a high level of skill, then I likely need more challenging tasks to enter into a state of flow. To the extent that I'm a newbie, don't have very well developed skills, then the tasks should be easier. The idea is, though, that there's a sweet spot of task challenge and participant ability that allows us to enter into a state of flow. So, a good manager, a good supervisor, a good trainer, as you're bringing someone along, you present someone successively more difficult challenges that are commensurate with the skills that they've developed so far, so that you can engineer an environment that affords them the sensation of flow. To me, being a manager or supervisor is just the bomb, because it's like the culmination of all our skills. It's our knowledge, our people skills, our understanding, and we get to craft an environment that allows someone to experience flow, something that's so awesome as that. How does life get any better being able to do that for other people, right? But also, think about it. This is something you can engineer for yourself. So to the extent that your skill level, right, supports the level of challenge that you face yourself with, to what extent am I stacking the deck in my favor that I get to experience a sense of flow? And if I'm giving myself tasks that are too easy, my abilities beyond that, then I'm just tricking myself. I got to bump up my game to continue to experience this sensation of flow. And note that if the task is not challenging, I'm going to be apathetic. Who cares? I could have done this, 20 years ago, right? Anxiety and worry, man, if the task is too challenging and my skill level isn't up, right? But let's suppose that my skill level is very high, then I might feel bored because the challenge doesn't test me. So it's crafting, right, that sweet spot in the center, and in so doing, we avoid the negative experiences. So, guess what? Homework 3, letter C, right? You and flow. Flow, where, when, how. Give me an example. Describe a situation, place, activity in which you've experienced a state of flow, your name, and the flow experience. Okay? So that's the template part. You're going to fill in your name. This is your flow experience. So for some of you, maybe some of you are athletes, and you're in the middle of an athletic event or whatever, and you enter that state of flow. Maybe you're a musician, and you hit it just right. Everything is on the money. I think I observed my dad do this quite often as a musician, right? And his skill, that he would enter into that state of flow and almost lose himself. And we see that often with bands, right? When everyone's, right, keyed into each other, that they produce something that is so amazing and so dynamic. Okay? So that's 3C. And this is certainly a multi-part assignment, so hang on, there'll be more, in case you were worrying it was over already. Now, supporting competence, what do we do? Well, positive feedback. 4 sources. What do we know? Well, the task itself can provide feedback. Am I successfully completing this task or not? Right? I'm pounding a nail into the wall. Is the nail going into the wall? Yes, it is. Well, then I must be pounding correctly. It could be that simple. It could be far more complex than that. It's the comparison of one's current performance with one's own past performance. And to me, this is probably, I've really been thinking about this a lot. I'm thinking about writing a book when I retire, and I'm starting to think a lot about this book. And to me, the most useful form of competition is competition within the self, and that is self-improvement. So it's being able to measure what I was capable of doing and then continuing to perform and watching my performance increase. One of the easiest examples is weightlifting, right? That I see numerically that I'm able to manipulate more weight, right? But then for you guys who lift weights, for you women who lift weights, you know that part of weightlifting is not just about how much weight, but also form in moving your body through the process. And that can help you avoid injury, right, as well. Comparison of one's current performance with the performance of others. I'm not so choked up about this. I think there's a lot of problems with that, and that's going to be one of the premises of my books, that this is distracting rather than informing or helping. The evaluation of others, and this is often embedded in what's called social comparison theory, as we compare ourselves to someone else. Now, this is useful if there's no standard of comparison that's known, so I can at least say, well, I'm better than that person. But then that can be demeaning to the other person. So I don't know psychologically that that's a healthy road to go on, but let us not go too deeply into that, right? The pleasure of optimal challenge, positive feedback, Harder's anagram study. Children experience greatest pleasure following success in the context of moderate challenge. So things that are too difficult might cause us worry that we didn't do them correctly. Things that are too easy, again, apathy, maybe boredom. But when it's a moderate level of challenge, even for children, they seem to resonate most reliably. Now, one thing that's difficult in school, right? When I was in grade school, we usually saw the class, and this is ancient, right? I'm talking 1960s. I first entered grade school, in 62? 63? I know I'm that old. Oh, God. But often the teachers split the class into 3 groups. So for like reading in Miss Leviere's class in 2nd grade, there's 3 groups. There's a number 1 group, there's a number 2 group, and there's a number 3 group. And each group was reading kind of at an average different level, but allowed then for at least moderate challenge, pretty well assigned to each group. Now the downside was that it's the comparison of others that we talk about. Which group do you want to be in the reading group? Do you want to be in the lowest reading group or you want to be in the top reading group? And one of the devastating effects of this is we all knew, the three, all of us in that class knew which group we were in, and we know what it meant to be in that group compared to the other groups. Not necessarily, I think that's an unfortunate side effect of the process, right? But now the cognitive processing model of feedback, we take a look at what's going on inside the noggin there. That's an official psychological term, noggin, right? So we have cognitive models of feedback. Sources of feedback could be the task, as I suggested. It could be the comparison to others. It can be the comparison to previous performances by the self. Now, the recipient then, the characteristics. What matters to the way people process feedback? Well, self-esteem. And high and low self-esteem is important here, but I think fragile versus stable self-esteem becomes equally important. That is, people with stable self-esteem can take critical feedback more readily than people with fragile self-esteem, right? The sense of self-efficacy. What is your belief that you can do it? And if you believe you can do it but it's not working out, that might be more frustrating than if you're not certain you can do it and it's not working out, right? The needs and goals. What is your need? How important is this performance to you, and what is your ultimate goal in conducting this performance, right? Maybe you just need to get the paper in so you can get, if it's a 25-point paper, you just want to get the paper in. You've calculated, if I get 15 points, I'll at least have a C in the course, and I'm good with that. That's your goal, right? Someone else might say anything less than an A is unacceptable to me. And then desire for performance feedback. And sometimes people don't want performance feedback. They just want to get their shit done. And they'd prefer not to hear about it, right? Other people want and seek out feedback on their performance. Now, the perception part of this, and this is still tied to the recipient, it's a recipient phenomenon, is the sign and the context of the feedback message. So the sign, right, is positive or negative feedback, and then what is that content of that message, what is actually being said. And then we go through a process of cognitive evaluations. Is this feedback accurate or is it somehow flawed? And note, I'm going to be much harsher on my evaluation of negative feedback than I will on positive feedback. Right? What is the credibility of the source providing the feedback? That is, do they know what they're talking about or are they full of shit? Note too, though, if it's negative feedback, I might view the source as less credible to buffer myself from the negative feedback. And notice I'm talking motivational phenomenon within this model. Okay? Is the system fair, the system that's providing the feedback, or is it inherently unfair? And again, positive feedback, I'm going to say, a fair system. Negative feedback, I might say, it's an unfair system. A motivational response. What are the expectancies? And here is a big clue by 4. If you have to give someone feedback and you're going to set up a meeting, say, hey, we got to talk about your performance, right? If a person expects to come in and get praised, they're going to get blindsided if they're criticized. And they're going to react probably negatively, right? Often, if you have to get bad news and you say, look, we need to have a meeting, when are you available? And they say, you agree on, well, we're going to do it Wednesday at 2. Say, good. So we're going to have a feedback meeting, and I'm going to talk to you about your performance, and I'm going to be honest. We got some good stuff to talk about, and we got some stuff that needs improvement. At least what you've done is you've been courteous to the person, and when they come in, you're not going to blindside them. They're expected to hear both good and bad, right? And then behavioral standards. What are the behavioral standards that surround this feedback, and are they being provided fairly too? What is the standard and what is expected, right? Now, what does this lead to? This leads to behavioral outcomes as a process of the feedback. So it can then point people in the direction they need to go. It can increase or diminish effort depending on how it went down. It can increase or diminish the desire to persist on the task, and it increases or diminishes the resistance to completing or participating in similar future tasks. So this is really we're going to keep returning to the course here in this very practical fashion. This is a wonderful academic exercise, psychology of motivation, etc. But what I'm really talking about here is building a toolkit that allows us to understand how people view their world and how we can become more effective with creating greater levels of motivation, if we so choose, in those around us and in ourselves. So practical lessons from feedback research, and if you've been in org psych, you're going to see that I recycled this slide. Yes, I do recycle a few slides here and there. Not that many, but a few. If you're going to give feedback to someone, feedback acceptance shouldn't be treated as a given. It's often misperceived or rejected. And often we have to kind of go round the rosy, we got to play ring around the rosy to get to the honest acceptance of the message. Managers can enhance credibility as sources of feedback by developing their expertise and creating a climate of trust. So this feedback is not something that's used to punish you or hurt you or embarrass you in front of others. It's something that we handle in a trusting environment. And I have the expertise that my feedback is legitimate. Negative feedback is typically misperceived or rejected, so if you got to give negative feedback, expect initial rejection and or misperception of what you're saying. Expect to have to explain again, and maybe several times, and differently. Feedback's too infrequent in organizations. We simply don't get enough, right? And usually when we get feedback, it's when it's too late. Feedback needs to be tailored to the recipient, so consider who you're speaking to, and out of kindness, out of empathy, develop a feedback plan, a feedback session, a feedback script that is most compatible with that person's needs and their individual styles. Now, high performers respond to feedback that enhances their feelings of competence and self-control, competence and autonomy, if you will. Right? Recipients perceive feedback as more accurately when they actively participate in the feedback session. So this can go all the way to creating the evaluation in the first place. That is, if we're going to evaluate each other, one of the things we do as instructors is we sit in on each other's classes, and one of the questions I ask before I go into the class as part of our script, right, is, what do you want me to watch for? Is there any areas that you particularly want feedback about? Are there any concerns you have or places where I should pay special attention? So I'm already making that person an active participant in the feedback session because I'm going to attend to their feedback needs. Destructive criticism tends to cause conflict, reduces motivation. No duh, thank you for that, Dr. Obvious. Right? The higher one rises in an organization, the less likely they are to receive quality feedback. And you could probably sit down, think about that for a couple minutes, and could you not generate a list of reasons why that might be? So that's enough of feedback. We're gonna move into relatedness here as our final part, the third component, right? So it was autonomy, competence, and as promised, alphabetically or however you want to slice and dice it, relatedness. So in the musical parlance, should we bring it on home? What do you think? Let's talk about relatedness. What do we know? It's a psychological need to establish close emotional bonds and attachment with other people, right? Or, as I look around, a lot of my relatedness needs are met from a feline audience. So I'm surrounded by cats here, and they do enhance my sense of relatedness, right? So it's the desire to be emotionally connected to and interpersonally involved in warm relationships. And I can't think of a nice warm-hearted companion like Penelope, right, sweetie? You are just a nice buddy. So what do we know then? Well, I'm gonna have us do a video here, and I'm gonna run this video through here. It's not a super long video, so let's do it this way. And I'm gonna put my microphone on here and just start the video. I know, it's pretty hokey, huh?
Let me show you a monkey raised on a nursing wire farm. Now here are 106's two mothers. As you can see, it was weaned on a wire mother. Here's baby 106. Watch.
He's going to the wire mother.
He's got to eat to live.
Oh, he's going back.
He's back on the cloth mother, and he'll stay on the cloth mother. Actually, this baby spends from 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother and less than 1 hour a day on the wire mother. We had predicted that the variable of contact comfort would be a variable of measurable importance, but we were unprepared to find that it completely overwhelmed and overshadowed all other variables, including those of nursing.
Frankly, Doctor, if it comes to a choice between wire and cloth, it's reasonable to expect that any child will go to the cloth. It's a matter of creature comfort, like a baby with its blanket. But is this really love?
Well, what do you mean by saying that a baby loves its mother? Certainly one thing we mean is that it gets a great feeling of security in the presence of the mother. Now, Mr. Collingwood, wouldn't you say that if you frightened a baby, that it went running to its mother, was comforted, and then all the fear disappeared and was replaced by a complete sense of security that that baby loved its mother? Now, in this experiment, this is the apparatus we use.
That looks diabolical.
That's just the way the baby monkey feels about it. Flashing eyes, loud sound, moving mechanical parts, all of these things are designed to frighten a monkey. Now here we have a peaceful, resting baby monkey. Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him.
He's scared, all right.
And he does what any child will do in a similar situation.
He runs away.
It's more than running away. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear. Contact with the mother changes his entire personality. Look, now he's actually threatening the diabolical object. All right. This gives us part of the picture of the strength of infantile love. This is a 6-foot square room with a few toys and other objects. But to the monkey, it's much more menacing. We know that when our own children are taken to a strange place without their mothers, they are often overwhelmed with fear. This room is just such a new and strange environment for the baby monkeys. No mother is in there. Now, let's put a monkey into the room. Notice how cautiously he enters the room. He's searching for comfort, but nothing relieves his disturbance. Now we'll take the baby monkey out and put in a wire mother.
Now, this one was nursed by a wire mother.
That's right, all his life.
She doesn't seem to help much.
Now, we'll try the same test with a cloth mother in the room. You see the contrast in the behavior? Despite the fact that the wire mother nursed him, she could offer this infant nothing in the way of affection or security. But here the monkey, by rubbing against the cloth mother, as if he were seeking as much contact comfort as he could get, builds up his reservoir of affection and security. First, his body relaxes as the fear disappears. But above and beyond this, new positive response patterns appear. He now goes out to explore and investigate this new, strange world. He is now a normal, happy, curious baby.
Alright guys, I'm back. Harry Harlow and his Rhesus Monkey studies. Absolutely fascinating area of psychology, the work of Harry Harlow. Sometimes it's tough to watch. Think about it. These are obviously impoverished environments that these monkeys are being exposed to. To the extent that you find that ethical or not, I'm going to leave that up to you. It does generate a lot of knowledge about attachment theory, if you will. And this, if you know Mary Ainsworth and her strange situation, this is growing out of the work of Harry Harlow and John Bowlby. So combined. What do we see here? Well, we see the tremendous calming potential in the cloth mother. And I think one of the most astounding things is when Harlow says, hey, when we measure the amount of time that we see the wire mother, the infant on the wire mother as opposed to the cloth mother, we're talking, what, 18 hours on the cloth mother. That's an astounding amount of time. It's a great dependent variable that shows the huge impact of that kind of contact comfort as Harlow is explaining it. Think in terms of the power of relatedness. When we see that the monkey is frightened in that strange room, the wire mother, although the monkey its whole life got sustenance, got nourishment, got its hunger needs met by the wire mother, it seems the relatedness needs being met by the cloth mother have a much more profound impact in the social behavior of the monkey. And that makes sense, right? When the monkey was frightened in that room, it is now able to sustain itself on the cloth mother and then engage in curiosity and exploring behaviors of the strange environment. And when we use the term safe base, you know, the colloquial term safe base, that is, if a child feels secure in the support, the relatedness that the parent offers, then the child will stray out and investigate its environment, having trust developed that it can return to the safe base if it's so required. And it allows for this kind of exploratory behavior to a greater degree. And, you know, when we are engaged in relationships with our children, with our partners, with our employees, to what extent do we represent, have we crafted this relationship where we represent a safe base so that people can go explore, they can grow as themselves, as human beings, and then have the security of returning back to us if things become too anxiety-provoking. So one of the greatest things we can do for each other is become that trusted safe base to another, be it an employee, be it a partner, obviously being a child, right? So when we look at this need for relatedness, what are the benefits, right? Well, involving relatedness, emotionally positive interactions and interaction partners of tremendous benefit, right? Second, supporting relatedness, the perception of social bond. Intimate, high-quality relationships that involve caring, liking, accepting, and valuing, right? Then we look at the third component, communal relationships. People care for the needs of each other, feel an obligation to support the other's welfare. And then finally, the internalization. Relationships that provide a rich supply of relatedness, need satisfaction, clear, convincing rationale for the prescriptions and proscriptions. That is, as I developed trust with a partner. I say, hey, you might want to think about doing this, and you might want to think about avoiding that. Again, prescription and proscription, right, are enhanced by the trust, by the rapport that's built up between the people. We have many of us have an high inherent need for relatedness, right? And it goes back to the first part of this assignment. Autonomy, competence, relatedness. What is it? Obviously, all three are necessary, but pick one and then talk about the environments that sustain it for you. So this yields attachment theory, and out of attachment theory, I also want to describe McClellan's need theory, just kind of as a counterpoint. McClellan suggests that we have three needs: a need for achievement, that is a desire to accomplish something difficult, and that can demonstrate our competence, right? A need for affiliation, and this is straight up the relatedness and why I included it at the spot, desire to spend time in social relationships and activities, and a need for power is a desire to influence, coach, teach, or encourage others to achieve. And note that power can be used in a way, teachers are often high in the need for power, but as our relationship, teacher to student, changes over time, my power begins to diminish, and ideally my student's power then increases. That as lessons are learned, right, and critical thinking is honed, then the student needs me to a lesser and lesser degree over time. And that's what we would call a beneficial power dynamic, right? Whereas controlling folks want power and they want to maintain power, so they never help to increase the other's power, right? So power can go two ways, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But the need for affiliation. Now, what McClellan was trying to do was trying to match people to occupations or jobs based on their need for achievement, their need for affiliation, or their need for power. And he developed profiles then. So like a typical manager, McClellan said, should be low in the need for achievement, low in the need for affiliation, but high in the need for power. And think about it. Do you want a boss that's everybody's friend? You know how well that works out, huh, Penelope? That usually doesn't work out too well. It usually engenders poor work outcomes and inherent unfairness, right? The boss shouldn't have a high need for achievement, because ideally the boss is there to facilitate the employee's need for achievement, but they should be in a high level of power, right? So we can see how this works, that relatedness is not always, high need for relatedness does not always indicate a good fit to a specific employment position. Right? So let's put it all together then. The social context that supports psychological needs, autonomy, competence, relatedness, environmental conditions that involves the need. Well, autonomy to the extent that we can provide opportunities for self-direction. And note that in many of my classes, I'm now moving to assignments like if you're going to pick a book in Psych and Law, you got 8 choices of book, and that really is to enhance one's sense of autonomy, that I get to choose what I want to write about, what I want to read, and that should then create benefits in terms of autonomy support. Competence, we try to develop assignments, let's say, that offer optimal challenge, and then provide positive feedback as a result of that. And then relatedness is social interaction, is usually the way that we feel that. And one of our concerns, right, in going online during this pandemic is some people might be kind of suffering a lack of affiliation. That is, their relatedness needs aren't necessarily being met. So again, by working in teams, yeah, there's practical aspects to working in teams, grading efficiency being kind of at the top of the list. But I think one of the overarching principles of using teams is to increase people's sense of relatedness. That we're in this together as Buckeyes, and we mutually support each other on our assignments, and it gives us an opportunity to interact with others. For those of us who are following pandemic guidelines strictly, might not be having our affiliations needs met to the degree we'd like. And that is developing a communal relationship within the course. We certainly create a sense of community in the classroom and I can observe it from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester, this ever-increasing kind of communal aspect to what we do in the classroom. We've been essentially robbed of that, so we're using teams to kind of supplant that area. So, I think it's about time to go to homework 3. If you're ready, back to homework 3, and this is part D, doing for others, right? So let's flip it. How do you, or could you, support someone else's sense of competence or autonomy? No more than a short paragraph on this, right? So I want to see your name, and that's the template again to kind of keep us on the right track with these assignments. And then autonomy or competence supporting behavior. How could you do it, or how do you do it? Either one is satisfactory. I've given you an awful lot of examples of ways that I'm trying to support your autonomy or support your competence in this regard. So consider that. And engagement then is based on psychological need satisfaction. So autonomy support, what we can see then, if we're going to increase engagement, and how do we define engagement? I want to start at the back here. The extent of engagement, if someone's engaged, what do we see? We see increased attention, we see increased effort, we see increased persistence, we see increased positive emotion, we see increased commitment, and we see increased voice, that is speaking up. Could define. And we're going to do this through nurturing psychological need for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And then here are essentially the prescriptions, right? So what does it mean to have autonomy support? The structure that we surround or embed it in a task can facilitate the perception of a competence, and then finally the involvement. All right, so, and how that feeds to relatedness. But all of those, if we combine and we do it well, right, if we're on task, if we're an effective supervisor, an effective leader is the term that's even probably more appropriate when we're talking about successful manipulation of these aspects of one's existence, right, is leadership, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's at home with our families, whether it's at our place of work, whether it's in our community, whether it's within our religious facility, this leadership that comprises a skillful application of all these principles. That's what it's about, and it's about others. So to the extent that we can lose ourselves in the service to others, which is a very Gandhi kind of idea, we demonstrate a benefit to a community, and we increase our value exponentially. So what makes for a good day? Well, it's the psychological nutriments necessary for a good day is positive well-being, vitality. And so a daily dose of autonomy for ourselves and for the people that we touch, right? Connecting on a daily basis with those around us, that is enhancing that level of relatedness. And then a daily kind of expression of competence, being involved in something that says, yeah, I'm a person of value, I'm a person of worth, I have being in touch with our self-efficacy. And these are the psychological nutriments for good days. So throughout this lecture, let's review. It's these 3 psychological needs: the need for autonomy, the need for competence, the need for relatedness. That if we understand what those needs are, and then we can understand the mechanisms for helping ourselves, and even more importantly, right, helping others meet those needs. And it doesn't get much better than that, right? So let's have some good days. Let's experience that positive well-being, and let's, engage in our life every day with increased vitality and this zest for living, which I think the zest for living is probably best derived for the zest for doing well for others. So let's call it good, and Pigpen's going to say goodbye to us. Pigpen was an amazing cat. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was a tough little fighter. Just a good cat. And there he is. I guess that would be Christmas time, wouldn't it? So that's an old picture. We haven't had Christmas tree up for a couple of years. Because one thing you find out, if you live in a house full of cats, when you get up in the morning, if you had a Christmas tree standing up, when you get in the morning, you have a Christmas tree laying down. So this year's Christmas tree was a pyramid of cardboard boxes that I built for them. Get in there, tear it up, knock it down, whatever. But So I hope you guys have a great day, and I hope that I sincerely hope that you're going to go out and you're going to experiment with these tools. You're going to think about the opportunities you have to create the environment that really supports the psychological needs of those people around you. So, take care, and I'll talk to you later.